It was a Friday afternoon on the 14th floor of Aldrich Development Group in downtown Denver, and Caroline Ash was holding a glass of champagne. The office around her was loud with applause. A dozen colleagues stood in a loose half-circle near her desk, clapping, a few raising their own glasses. She had done it. 3 months into the VP role, and she had already trimmed the department by 9 positions. Clean, efficient, finished. Drew Colton walked past them carrying a cardboard box with both hands. A framed photograph lay flat on top, a small potted plant wedged against a stack of binders. His badge lanyard hung from his coat pocket. He did not look at anyone. He walked toward the elevator. The doors opened before he reached them. Robert Aldrich stepped out. 63 years old, leather portfolio under one arm, coming directly from City Hall. He scanned the floor, and his gaze settled on the empty desk near the back wall. Where is he? Caroline's glass stopped halfway to her mouth. What she thought was her biggest win is about to become the worst call she has ever made. Stay. This one turns slowly, and it turns all the way. Drew Colton was 38 years old and had worked at Aldrich Development Group for 7 years. Every weekday morning, he drove a 12-year-old Subaru Outback west on 6th Avenue, dropped his daughter Hazel at Devaney Elementary by 7:45, then looped back east toward downtown with a steel thermos of black coffee wedged between the seats. He parked in the basement garage at the Aldrich building, took the elevator to 14, and sat down at a desk near the back corner of the operations floor. A desk no one walked past unless they needed something. His title was Operations Coordinator. On paper, the role meant tracking permit timelines, filing compliance updates with the city, coordinating vendor schedules for active projects. It was the kind of work that made no noise when it was done right and only became visible when it wasn't. Drew did it right. His filing cabinets were the most organized system on the floor, color-coded tabs, cross-reference binders, every variance application indexed by parcel number and hearing date. Nobody praised it. Nobody needed to. The work moved because Drew moved it. 5 years earlier, he had held a different title, Senior Project Manager. He had led the entitlement and permitting process for the Meridian Complex, Aldrich Development's $90 million mixed-use flagship on the edge of the Rhino District. For years of zoning hearings, environmental reviews, setback calculations, and city council presentations, Drew had been the point of contact for every agency involved. His name was on the original variance approval as the responsible filing party. The Meridian was the biggest thing Aldrich had ever built, and Drew had been the one who made sure the city let them build it. Then, in 2021, Robert Aldrich restructured the company. The project management division was dissolved. Some people took severance. Drew was offered a choice, coordinator role or the door. He took the coordinator role. The hours were steady. The office was 12 minutes from Hazel's school. That mattered more than a title. His wife, Karen, had died the year before. A car accident on I-70 during a late November snowstorm west of Idaho Springs. Drew did not talk about it at work. He did not talk about it at home, either, except in the things he did. Packing Hazel's lunch the night before, checking the weather 3 times every morning, always driving 5 under the speed limit when the roads were wet. Caroline Ash had arrived at Aldrich 3 months ago. 34 years old, recruited from a competing firm in Phoenix, brought in specifically to modernize the operations division and reduce overhead. She was sharp, efficient, and fluent in the language of performance metrics. She measured people by output. She made decisions quickly, and she had inherited a department she believed was 15% overstaffed. Martin Poole had been at Aldrich for 18 years. 55 years old, Senior Director of Development, Robert's most trusted lieutenant. He had an office with a view of the mountains and a handshake that lasted exactly 1 second too long. Within Caroline's first week, Martin had placed a printed list on her desk, 14 names flagged as redundant, with notes beside each one. Beside Drew Colton's name, Martin had written 2 words, coordinator, non-essential. What Caroline did not know, what no one on the 14th floor knew except Martin himself, was that 6 months earlier, Drew had found something in the Meridian files. During a routine permit renewal, he had pulled the original variance application and compared it against the filed version in the city's records. The setback distances did not match. The numbers on the filed version had been altered, environmental survey figures adjusted just enough to meet the minimum zoning threshold. Drew had flagged the discrepancy in a written memo and handed it to Martin directly. Martin told him he would handle it. Nothing had happened since. That evening, Drew picked up Hazel from the after-school program. She was 10, quiet in the way that observant children often are, with a habit of building things out of whatever was available. In the car, she held up a model bridge she had constructed from popsicle sticks and white glue, an arch design with a lattice underside. Drew took it from her at a red light, turned it over in his hands slowly, and nodded. He set it on the dashboard, and they drove home without the radio on. The following Monday morning, Caroline arrived at 7:15. The office was still empty. She walked to Drew's former desk, pulled open his filing cabinet, and began sorting through the contents. The plan was simple: redistribute his responsibilities, reassign his files, close the position permanently. What she found stopped her. Inside the first drawer alone, there were over 200 pages of permit documentation, each one annotated in Drew's handwriting. Margin notes cross-referenced specific city code sections. Zoning maps had been marked with setback lines, easement boundaries, and overlay districts in 3 different colors of ink. Variance applications were indexed not just by date, but by hearing outcome, appeal status, and the name of every commissioner who had voted. Cross-reference tags linked documents across multiple drawers. A permit application in the first drawer pointed to correspondence in the third, which pointed to a site survey addendum in a binder on the shelf above. This was not filing. This was architecture. The kind of system that takes years to build, maintained by someone who understood not just where the documents went, but why they mattered and how they connected to each other. Caroline had managed operations departments at 2 previous firms. She had never seen anything like this from a coordinator. Caroline opened the second drawer. It held the complete compliance history of the Meridian Complex. Every submission, every city response, every amendment, organized in a sequence that told the story of a 4-year approval process from the first pre-application meeting to the final certificate of occupancy. Drew had not just tracked the permits. He had built the entire regulatory framework that allowed the Meridian to exist. Every document was current. Every cross-reference was accurate. The system had been maintained for 5 years by a man whose title said coordinator. She closed the drawer and sat in Drew's chair. She stayed there for several minutes, looking at the cabinet the way someone looks at a load-bearing wall they had almost knocked down. At 8:45, her phone rang. Robert Aldrich's assistant. Robert wanted her upstairs immediately. His office was on the 16th floor. When she walked in, Martin Poole was already seated in one of the leather chairs by the window. Robert stood behind his desk, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, portfolio open. The Denver Planning Commission has requested a full compliance review of the Meridian Complex, Robert said. New mixed-use project breaking ground on the adjacent parcel has triggered a setback re-evaluation across the entire block. They want our original survey data, the variance filings, the environmental assessment, and all supporting correspondence. Every page. Caroline nodded. Drew Colton managed every permit on that building, Robert said. He testified at the variance hearing. His name is on the approval as the responsible filing party. Get him on the phone and have him walk the compliance team through the full record. Caroline did not move. He was part of last week's reduction, she said. Robert Aldrich set his reading glasses on the desk. He looked at her without speaking. He did not repeat the question. He did not ask her to explain. He simply let the facts sit in the room and take up all the space it needed. The silence was the kind that makes a person aware of their own breathing. Outside, through the window behind Robert's desk, the late morning sun hit the glass towers of downtown Denver and bounced flat white light across the ceiling. Somewhere on the floor below, a phone rang and stopped. Martin Poole, seated 3 feet away, did not move, did not speak, did not look at anyone. His hands rested on the arms of his chair with the particular stillness of someone who is being very careful about what his body says. But this was only the surface of what Caroline had set in motion. And the deeper she looked, the less any of it would look like a staffing decision. Caroline spent Tuesday and Wednesday trying to reconstruct the compliance file on her own. She pulled every document from Drew's cabinet, carried them to the main conference room, and laid them across the table in chronological order. She cross-referenced each filing against the city's public records database. The documentation was thorough, dates matched, permit numbers aligned, hearing outcomes were accurately recorded. but the trail stopped at a specific point. Drew's files referenced original survey data and direct correspondence with the city planning office that were not in the cabinet. Some of it was in the company's archived storage system, filed under project codes only Drew had used. The rest appeared to exist only in Drew's personal records, emails, notes, and working drafts that had never been uploaded to the shared server. On Wednesday afternoon, Caroline called Drew's cell phone. It rang 6 times and went to voicemail. She called again an hour later. Same result. She did not leave a message either time. At 4:30, she pulled Drew's home address from his HR file, got in her car, and drove west on 6th Avenue toward Lakewood. The house was a single-story ranch on a quiet street lined with mature elms, beige siding, a chain-link fence around a small yard, a basketball hoop with a frayed net mounted above the garage. She parked at the curb and walked to the front door. Drew opened it after the second knock. He was wearing a flannel shirt and jeans. Behind him, through the hallway, Caroline could see Hazel sitting at the kitchen table, a textbook open in front of her, a pencil moving slowly across the page. "I need your help with the Meridian Compliance Review," Caroline said. Drew studied her for a moment. His expression did not change. "I was terminated on Friday," he said. "I don't have an obligation to help. The city is requesting the full file. We can't locate the original survey correspondence without." "I understand what you can't locate," Drew said. "That doesn't change my situation." Caroline glanced past him into the hallway. The cardboard box from the office sat unopened on the floor beside the coat rack, exactly where he had set it down 4 days ago. The potted plant was still inside, its leaves beginning to lean toward the light coming through the front window. The framed photograph, a landscape, something green and wide, was face down on top of the binders. Drew followed her gaze to the box, then looked back at her. His expression did not change, but something in his posture shifted, a slight squaring of the shoulders, the kind of adjustment a person makes when they have decided to stop explaining. "Good luck with the review," he said. He stepped back and closed the door. Not hard, just closed. The next morning, Caroline sat across from Robert Aldrich and told him Drew had refused. Robert leaned back in his chair and pressed his thumb against the bridge of his nose. "We fired the man," he said. "He doesn't owe us anything." Martin, seated by the window in his usual chair, spoke before the silence could settle. "We can bring in an outside consultant to reconstruct the records. Peterson Marks has a land use team that's done this kind of thing before. It'll take longer, but we don't need Drew Colton to respond to a routine city review." Robert looked at Martin for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Give me a proposal by Thursday." Caroline returned to the 14th floor, but she did not call Peterson Marks. She kept digging. She was no longer just trying to assemble the compliance file. She was trying to understand who Drew Colton had actually been inside this company, and why someone had wanted him gone. She found his name on the original engineering submittals for the Meridian Complex, not as a reviewer, but as the lead signatory. She found minutes from 3 separate city council sessions where Drew had provided sworn testimony on setback calculations, traffic impact assessments, and stormwater mitigation plans. She found the final variance hearing transcript, where his name appeared 14 times in 37 pages. Drew had not just managed the permits. He had personally stood in front of the Denver Planning Commission, fielded questions from 5 commissioners, and defended every number in the application under oath. His name was listed on the approved variance as the responsible party, the individual the city held personally accountable for the accuracy of every figure in the filing. Without Drew, the firm could not credibly respond to the compliance review. Any outside consultant would need months just to understand the file structure, and they still would not have the original correspondence or the institutional memory of what had been negotiated, what had been conceded, and why. Caroline sat at her desk that evening, long after the floor had emptied. She opened the company's internal correspondence archive and searched for any communication between Drew Colton and Martin Poole in the previous 12 months. She found routine project updates, scheduling confirmations, and vendor approvals. Standard traffic. But there was something else she was looking for, something specific, and it was not there. She did not know exactly what shape it would take. But she knew that Drew had flagged a discrepancy to Martin 6 months before his name appeared on a termination list that Martin had personally compiled. She knew that Martin had written the words non-essential beside the name of a man whose fingerprints were on every regulatory document the company's most important building had ever required. The reason Martin had given her was starting to feel very thin, and Caroline Ash had not gotten to where she was by ignoring things that felt thin. The following Saturday morning, Caroline drove back to Lakewood. She did not call ahead. She parked at the curb and knocked on Drew's front door. He opened it in the same flannel shirt, a dish towel draped over one shoulder. The house smelled like coffee and toast. He looked at her and waited. "I'm not here because the company sent me," Caroline said. "I'm here because the compliance review could jeopardize the Meridian's occupancy permits. If the city finds material discrepancies in the original filings, they can suspend the certificate. Every commercial tenant in that building gets a 30-day notice. Every residential leaseholder gets a relocation letter." Drew did not react. He leaned against the door frame and crossed his arms. "Did Martin send you?" he asked. "No." He studied her face the way someone studies a document they are not yet sure they trust, looking for the part that does not match the rest. Then he stepped back and held the door open. They sat at the kitchen table. Hazel was in her room with the door half closed. The model bridge sat on a shelf above the microwave, balanced between a cereal box and a stack of mail. The morning light came through the window above the sink and laid a bright rectangle across the floor. 6 months ago, Drew said, I pulled the original variance application for a routine permit renewal, something I'd done a dozen times. Except this time, I compared my submission against the version in the city's records. He paused. His hands were flat on the table. The setback distances on the filed version didn't match mine. The environmental survey figures had been altered, not by much, 3 to 5 feet on 2 of the 4 property boundaries, just enough to clear the minimum zoning threshold without triggering a mandatory redesign of the ground floor commercial footprint. Caroline did not interrupt. I wrote a memo documenting the discrepancy. I walked it to Martin's office and handed it to him personally. He read it in front of me. He told me he would handle it. Drew looked at her. That was January. Nothing happened. And then in April, my name appeared on your list. The room was quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a neighbor's dog barked twice and stopped. Show me, Caroline said. Drew stood, walked to a closet at the end of the hallway, and returned with a manila folder. Inside were 2 documents, his original survey submission, date stamped and bearing his signature, and a printed copy of the version filed with the city. He laid them side by side on the table and pointed to the setback figures on each. The numbers were different, not dramatically, the kind of difference a casual reviewer would miss entirely. But the original numbers, Drew's numbers, would have required a costly redesign of the Meridian's ground floor commercial space. Someone had changed them to avoid that expense. That's why I was fired, Drew said quietly. Not because I was redundant. Caroline picked up both documents. She looked at the date stamps, the signature blocks, the survey reference numbers. She held them side by side and read each line twice. Then she set them back on the table, aligned their edges, stood up, and walked to the front door. She did not say goodbye. She drove east on 6th Avenue toward downtown Denver. The Saturday streets were mostly empty. She parked in the Aldrich garage, took the elevator to 14, and sat down at her computer in the dark, quiet office. She was not looking for Drew's files anymore. She was looking for Martin's. What she did not expect to find was how clean the trail actually was, and how much that cleanliness told her. Caroline spent the rest of Saturday and most of Sunday inside the company's archived filing system. She was not searching randomly. She had 2 documents in front of her, Drew's original survey submission and the version filed with the city, and she needed to find the exact point where one became the other. She started with the Meridian Complex's variance application timeline. The filing had been submitted to the Denver Planning Commission in March of 2019. Drew's original survey, the one with the correct setback distances, was date-stamped February 28th of that year. The filed version, with the altered numbers, was stamped March 14th. 14 days between the two. Caroline pulled the internal approval chain for that filing period. Every variance application at Aldrich required sign-off from the Senior Director of Development before submission to the city. In March of 2019, that title belonged to Martin Poole. She found the sign-off sheet in the system's approval log. Martin's signature was on the filed version, the one with the altered setback distances. Not Drew's. Drew had signed his original submission on February 28th. Martin had signed the modified version that went to the city on March 14th. Caroline went deeper. She navigated to the Archive Drafts directory, a subfolder most people at Aldrich did not know existed, buried 3 levels below the main project index under a generic label that read Pre-Submission. Inside, she found Drew's original submission in its complete, unmodified form. Every page matched the version Drew had shown her at his kitchen table. The upload date read February 28th. The setback distances were correct. The file metadata showed it had not been opened or modified since the day Drew had uploaded it. The sequence was plain. Drew had submitted accurate survey data on February 28th. 14 days later, Martin had filed a modified version with the city under his own authority and his own signature. The setback distances had been reduced by 3 to 5 feet on 2 boundaries, just enough to avoid triggering a mandatory redesign of the ground floor commercial space that would have cost Aldrich Development between $800,000 and $1.2 million. Martin had altered a document filed with a government agency to avoid a redesign that would have cost the company money and time. That alone was serious. But what came after was worse. When Drew had discovered the discrepancies 6 months ago and brought it directly to Martin in a written memo, Martin had not corrected the filing. He had not disclosed the issue to Robert. He had not consulted legal. He had not initiated an internal review. He had read the memo, told Drew he would handle it, and then done nothing for 3 months. And then, with careful, deliberate timing, he had placed Drew's name on a printed list beside the words coordinator, non-essential, and handed that list to a newly hired VP who had no institutional memory, no context for who Drew was or what he had built, and every professional incentive to act on it quickly and without questions. Martin had not just covered up a filing error. He had engineered the removal of the only witness. Caroline leaned back in her chair. The 14th floor was completely dark except for the cone of light from her desk lamp. Outside the windows, the Denver skyline glowed against the foothills. Behind her, on the credenza, the bottle of champagne from Friday still sat where someone had left it after the celebration. The gold foil was torn. The cork lay beside it. A half-inch of flat liquid sat in the bottom of the bottle, catching the lamplight. She picked it up. She carried it to the kitchen alcove at the end of the hall, held it over the trash can, and let go. The glass hit the plastic liner, and the sound echoed down the empty floor. Monday morning, Caroline was in Robert Aldrich's office at 7:30. She carried a folder, not thick, but organized with the precision she had learned to associate with Drew Colton's work because she had learned it from his files. 2 versions of the survey, side by side. The sign-off sheet bearing Martin's signature. The archive draft with Drew's original upload date. A printed timeline showing the 14-day gap between submission and filing. Robert took the folder without a word. He sat down, put on his reading glasses, and read through each document slowly. He turned the pages one at a time, setting each one face down on the left side of his desk before picking up the next. The only sound in the room was paper against wood. When he finished, he placed his reading glasses on top of the stack and folded his hands. He did not look angry. He looked like a man recalibrating the weight of something he had trusted for 18 years. "How long have you known about this?" he asked. "Since Saturday," Caroline said. "Drew Colton showed me the original and filed versions. I found the approval chain and the archive draft in our own system." Robert picked up his desk phone and pressed a single button. "Ask Martin to come up," he said. His voice was level. Martin Poole appeared in the doorway 4 minutes later. He wore a gray suit and a blue tie. He glanced at Caroline, then at the documents fanned across Robert's desk, and sat down in the leather chair by the window, the same chair he had occupied in every meeting Caroline had attended in this room. Robert did not ease into it. He picked up the 2 survey versions and held them out, one in each hand. February 28th. March 14th. Same parcel, same project, different setback numbers. Drew Colton signed the first one. You signed the second. Walk me through it. Martin's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The original figures were borderline, he said. We were 3 weeks from the filing deadline. A redesign at that stage would have cost over $1 million and pushed the Meridian behind schedule by 4 months. I reviewed the survey data, determined the adjustments were within acceptable engineering tolerances, and authorized the filing. You altered the numbers, Robert said. I exercise professional judgment on a time-sensitive submission. Robert set both documents on the desk. Then 6 months ago, Drew Colton discovered the discrepancy and brought it to you in writing. What did you do with his memo? Martin did not answer immediately. He adjusted his cuff link, a small, precise movement that took exactly long enough for him to choose his next sentence. I assessed the risk and determined it was negligible. You buried it, Robert said. And then you put his name on a termination list and handed it to a new VP who had no context for who he was or what he knew. The room was very still. Robert stood. You're suspended effective immediately. Full internal review. Legal will be involved. Leave your access badge with Linda on your way out. Martin looked at Caroline. She held his gaze without moving, without blinking, without looking away. He stood, buttoned his jacket with one hand, and walked out. His footsteps faded down the hallway toward the elevator. Robert turned to Caroline. He was still standing. Bring Drew back, he said. Not as a favor. Not as a contractor. A formal offer, a real position, full reinstatement of benefits. Whatever it takes to make this right. Caroline nodded once, picked up the folder, and left the building. She drove west on 6th Avenue for the third time in 10 days. Drew's house looked the same. Beige siding, chain-link fence, basketball hoop with the frayed net. The elm trees along the street had started turning, their edges going dry and gold in the early autumn heat. Caroline parked at the curb and knocked. Drew opened the door. This time he did not lean against the frame. He stood straight, hands at his sides, and waited. Can I come in? She asked. He stepped back. They sat at the kitchen table again. Same 2 chairs. Same window behind Drew looking out at the backyard fence and the elm shadows moving across the dry grass. The dish towel was folded on the counter. The coffee pot was half full. The house was quiet. Hazel was at a friend's house for the afternoon. Caroline did not pitch the job. She did not open with an offer or a number or a title. She told them what she had found. Martin's signature on the altered filing. The 14-day gap. The archive draft that proved Drew's original submission had never been touched. Martin's suspension that morning, effective immediately. Drew listened without interrupting. His hands rested flat on the table, fingers spread slightly, the way a person holds themselves steady when they are hearing something they already suspected but needed someone else to say out loud. He did not nod. He did not ask questions. He waited until she was completely finished. Then she stopped talking about Martin. I didn't question the list, she said. I looked at a title and a pay grade, and I made a cut. I didn't look at who you were. I didn't ask a single question about why your name was on that page. I celebrated removing you from a building you helped build. She paused. That's on me. Not on Martin. On me. Drew sat with the stillness of someone who has heard what he needed to hear and is deciding what to do with it. His gaze moved to the shelf above the microwave. Hazel's popsicle stick bridge was still there, balanced between the cereal box and the mail, one end slightly drooping where the glue had softened in the kitchen heat. I'll come back, he said. One condition. I report directly to Robert, not through Martin's chain, not through anyone Martin appointed or supervised. Done, Caroline said. Neither of them moved for a moment. The refrigerator cycled on and hummed. The light through the kitchen window had shifted, and the bright rectangle on the floor had moved halfway across the room. Something had changed between them. Not warmth, not yet. Not forgiveness, either, because that word implies a debt settled, and what had happened was not settled. It was something quieter than both of those things. Recognition. She was seeing him for the first time as what he actually was, not a line item, not a title, not a name on a list. And he was letting her look. That was the part that mattered. He did not have to. He chose to. Drew returned to the 14th floor on a Wednesday morning, 8 days after he had carried a cardboard box past a champagne toast and walked out. His desk was exactly as he had left it. The filing cabinet was untouched. The chair was pushed in at the same angle. Even the pen cup sat in its usual position on the right side of the surface. Caroline had told the facilities team the day after the city review request came in, do not reassign, do not clear, do not touch this workspace. He set his bag down, pulled out the chair, and sat for a moment. He opened the top drawer of the filing cabinet and looked at the files inside. Exactly as he had left them, tabs aligned, nothing out of sequence. Then he reached into his shirt pocket, took out the popsicle stick Hazel had given him, and set it against the base of his monitor. Within an hour, he had a stack of documents on the conference room table and a pot of coffee from the kitchen alcove. By noon, he was standing in front of a whiteboard, walking the four-person compliance team through the original survey data point by point. He reconstructed the correct setback calculations in red marker, identified every point where the filed version diverged from his submission, and mapped each discrepancy to the specific zoning code section it triggered. The team took notes. Caroline stood in the doorway at the back of the room, arms crossed, watching him work. She did not interrupt. She did not need to. That afternoon, Robert Aldrich's attorneys filed a voluntary disclosure with the Denver Planning Commission. The document included the corrected survey data, a line-by-line comparison of both filings, a detailed remediation plan, and a full narrative of the internal review that had uncovered the discrepancies. Robert signed the cover letter personally. The following morning, Robert Aldrich called Martin Poole. The call lasted less than 4 minutes. 18 years at Aldrich Development Group, ended by a conversation shorter than a coffee break. Martin's building access was revoked before noon. His email account was suspended. His office on the 14th floor was cleared by the facilities team that same afternoon. The personal items boxed, the company laptop collected, the door locked, the brass nameplate unscrewed from the wall, and placed in a drawer at the front desk that no one would open again. That afternoon, Drew picked Hazel up from school. She climbed into the Subaru with her backpack and a plastic bag from art class. At a red light on 6th Avenue, she reached into the bag and pulled out a single popsicle stick, slightly bent, with a drop of dried glue on one end, left over from a new project she had started that week. She held it out to him. "For your desk," she said. Drew took it and slipped it into his shirt pocket. He looked at the road. The light turned green. 3 months passed. The Denver Planning Commission accepted the remediation plan in October. The Meridian Complex retained its occupancy permits without interruption. The corrected setback distances required a minor modification to the ground floor commercial frontage, a 12-inch adjustment to one exterior wall section that cost Aldrich Development $84,000 and took a construction crew 6 days to complete. A fraction of what the original redesign would have cost in 2019. A fraction of what the cover-up had nearly cost the company in 2026. Robert Aldrich created a new position, Director of Compliance, and offered it to Drew without posting the role or interviewing another candidate. Drew accepted. His office was on the 14th floor, 3 doors down from where his old desk had been. The filing cabinets came with him. So did the pen cup. Caroline remained VP of Operations. In the months since Drew's return, they had built a working rhythm that neither of them had designed or discussed. She handled operational strategy, budget projections, vendor negotiations, and departmental staffing. He handled the regulatory architecture, permit review, zoning compliance, city correspondence, and every interaction with the Planning Commission. Their responsibilities overlapped just enough that they spoke nearly every day, sometimes in scheduled meetings, sometimes standing in the hallway between their offices with coffee cups in hand, sometimes in the shorthand of 2 people who had learned how the other one thinks and had stopped needing to explain the steps between the question and the answer. On a Friday evening in late October, the 14th floor emptied early. A Broncos home game downtown had pulled most of the staff out by 4:30. By 6:15, the only lights still on in the building were in Drew's office and the blue-white glow of Caroline's laptop screen 3 doors down. Drew was reviewing structural plans for a new Aldrich project in the Highlands neighborhood. He had the zoning overlay maps spread across his desk, a red pen in his hand, a half-empty coffee mug pushed to one side. The popsicle stick from Hazel was propped against his monitor, leaning slightly to the left like a small, crooked bookmark. Caroline appeared in his doorway. She was holding 2 paper cups of coffee from the machine in the kitchen alcove, the same alcove where, 3 months earlier, she had dropped a champagne bottle into the trash on a dark Sunday night. She walked in without asking, set 1 cup on the corner of his desk away from the plans, and sat down in the chair across from him. Drew looked up from the overlay map. He did not reach for the coffee immediately. He looked at her. Neither of them spoke. The building's ventilation system hummed through the ceiling vents. The overhead light in the hallway clicked off on its motion sensor, and the only light left was the desk lamp between them, throwing long shadows across the zoning map and the walls. Caroline's gaze moved to the popsicle stick leaning against his monitor. Something shifted at the corner of her mouth, Not quite a smile, but the place where one would start. Drew picked up the coffee cup and took a sip. Caroline did the same. Robert Aldrich passed the open doorway on his way to the elevator. He had his coat over one arm and his portfolio in the other hand. He glanced in, saw the two of them sitting across from each other in the lamplight, and kept walking without breaking stride. His footsteps faded down the hallway, and then the elevator chimed. At 6:45, Drew locked his office door and pulled on his jacket. Caroline was already in the hallway, bag over one shoulder, laptop tucked under her arm. They walked to the elevator together, rode it to the basement garage without speaking, and stepped out into the concrete and fluorescent quiet of the parking level. Their cars were 4 spaces apart, his Subaru, her Audi. Drew walked to the driver's side of his car. Caroline walked to hers. They did not say goodnight. They did not wave. They did not need to. The garage gate lifted with a low mechanical grind. Drew pulled out first, his headlights sweeping across the concrete wall. Caroline followed a few seconds later. Their taillights climbed the exit ramp one after the other and disappeared into the Denver evening. Neither of them had been celebrating anything, but neither of them was leaving alone.